people of Central America believed that in the beginning, the gods had called a world into existence. But the gods fought among themselves and destroyed that world. They destroyed and created the world several times over. The forces of nature were their weapons. Then the gods came together to fight the great earth monster. Her broken body arose from the waters to form the mountains of the world. The land the gods had created from the ceaseless battle of fire, water, and wind is one of the richest and most diverse on the planet. The spines of the earth monster run the length of Central America, from mountain lakes and high volcanoes, from pine-studded canyons to deserts. In the south, rainforests cloak the steep slopes, and to the east lie the tropical waters of the Caribbean. From this great diversity arose cultures and civilizations shaped by their natural surroundings. In the Caribbean lived the least known of the cultures, the Taíno. The Maya grew from the tropical forests, and in the harsh northern deserts of Mexico arose the Aztecs. The creation of the region, its wildlife and its civilizations, is the story of the spirits of the Jaguar. This program looks at the creation of Central America, the land that stretches between the great continents of North and South America, and of the Caribbean islands that lie to the east. At the eastern boundary of this new world are the small tropical paradise islands that divide the Caribbean from the Atlantic. Inside the small isles lie the large Caribbean islands of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Cuba, and Jamaica. Further west still lies Central America. Yet 150 million years ago, there was only water. The islands of the Caribbean were forged by undersea volcanoes far to the west, over 1,000 kilometers out in the Pacific Ocean. The myth told of a violent volcanic origin and Earth rising from the dark waters. And indeed, over the millennia, islands emerged from the battle of sea and fiery land. And these raw rocky isles grew larger and more numerous. This volcanic archipelago formed the edge of one of the vast plates of the Earth's crust. As the plate began to move, the islands started out on an extraordinary journey eastward towards the gap between North and South America. As they approached, the islands were squeezed and scrunched together, scraping against the continents. Whilst the islands were docked, there was the opportunity for the first passengers to come aboard. The wind carried the tiny spores of ferns which settled the bare slopes. Over millennia, the islands were clothed in forests of tree ferns. "80 million years ago, primitive plants dominated the islands, and the sound of archaic insects filled the night air. The first vertebrate to come aboard the islands was not one of the mighty dinosaurs that dominated the land, but seems to have been a frog. This improbable pioneer hopped up the chain of islands from South America. This particular frog had one great advantage. Unlike others, it didn't require water to breed. The tadpoles complete their development within the confines of the egg. The miniature colonists emerge, ready to spread out into the dark forests. These had been brightened with the arrival of flowering plants, and with the flowers, a butterfly joined the passenger list. Many butterflies can fly long distances and could easily have reached the Caribbean islands in their present position, but the glasswing isn't one of them. It's a puny flyer, able to flutter no more than a few meters through the still air of the deep forest. The glasswing butterfly must have joined the islands whilst they were docked, but the islands didn't remain close to the continents. 60 million years ago, they set sail with their passengers away from North America, cruising to the northeast. Now they were truly Caribbean islands. As the islands traveled, their passengers evolved into unique island forms. Then, 50 million years ago, the northern islands crashed into the submerged rocky mass of the Bahamas bank. The collision created the largest of the Caribbean islands, Cuba. Animals now had to make their own way out to the islands. Some swam out like the iguana. Young rock iguanas have an inbuilt urge to disperse from their place of birth, and these babies, no more than 20 centimeters long, paddled over 200 kilometers from North America to arrive on Cuba. The iguanas were to form a dynasty of islanders. Cuba, all those millions of years ago, was covered in forests, festooned with bromeliads and orchids. This tiny bird, the toady, was already on Cuba, for it had stowed away whilst the islands were sailing out from North America. The toady is no marathon flyer. Its short, stubby wings are designed for brief flights in pursuit of the numerous insects of the island. Whilst the toady was one of the smallest inhabitants, the iguanas grew into giants, over 2 meters in length. Head bobbing is a threat to fend off other iguanas from a patch of food, such as cycads, for these fierce-looking reptiles are actually vegetarians. The cycads are very ancient plants, early passengers that may have evolved red fruit for the iguanas. Rock iguanas are fiercely territorial. The males guard food and females against any challengers. The battle begins with head bobbing and bluffs, and escalates as the males inflate their bodies to exaggerate their size. If the displays fail, then real warfare breaks out. The victor is invariably the larger, stronger male. The loser has little chance of breeding. The line of unique island iguanas will be fathered by the dominant male. The toadies too defend a territory, the center of which is their nest. Like their distant ancestors, the kingfishers, the toadies nest in holes in banks. These diminutive birds have evolved over tens of millions of years into true Caribbean islanders, found nowhere else on Earth. The evidence about which creatures lived on the islands so long ago comes from the sap of a tree. The copious amounts of sap not only engulfed stray feathers, it attracted insects. The unwary got stuck. The struggling insects attracted predators, like the frog. They were engulfed. Their fate was literally sealed. They were frozen for eternity, preserved in amber, the fossilized sap. They form a record of island life 45 million years ago. The anther of a plant caught at the very instant of shedding its pollen. All these creatures had their own individual history of arrival. Lizards were carried into the Caribbean by currents of the sea. Other prisoners of amber, such as insects, had been conveyed to the islands by the currents of the air. The most remarkable of all wind-assisted immigrants was the ancestor of this hummingbird. The bee hummingbird of Cuba is the smallest bird in the world. The female's body is 2 centimeters long. Whilst on the wing, her heart beats over 1,000 times per minute. The female is so small that she risks becoming entangled in a spider's web when she collects silk for her nest. Only the female builds the nest. The male's role is to guard against intruders into the territory. For this marvel of miniaturization, even caterpillars appear threatening. Cuba was the source for much of the wildlife of the other Caribbean islands. But then, whilst Cuba was firmly stuck on the Bahamas bank, a split appeared in the plate that carried these islands. The neighboring islands were moving away, heading eastward, and taking with them their own Noah's Arks of plants and animals. In their wake came a submerged island, which surfaced only 10 million years ago. This was Jamaica, the most distinctive of all the Caribbean islands. Millions of years underwater meant Jamaica emerged as virgin soil for new arrivals that would have been crushed by competition on the older islands. Today, it looks different and is different from any of them. The Jamaican streamer-tail is one of the most dazzling members of a radiant family. Its ancestors arrived from Central America to fill the hummingbird vacancy on this new land. It uses that long tongue to sip nectar from the many flowers of Jamaica, like the turnera. One of its favorite plants is the giant bromeliad. The flower spike is a meter tall and provides plenty of sugar-rich nectar to fuel the hummingbird's energetic flight. The cool, damp mountain forests of Jamaica are ideal for the growth of bromeliads. They festoon the branches, and the weight of this garden in the sky can amount to several tons on a single tree. Having no roots in the ground, bromeliads gather their water from the sky. The leaves are smooth and shaped like gutters. Rainwater runs down to collect in the base of the plant. The bromeliad is a pond in the sky. The plant, with its own water reservoir, is a miniature world inhabited by a host of creatures. There are even plankton swimming in this pint-sized ocean. These strange creatures are the young of a crab that has come to depend on the bromeliad. The female circulates the water, increasing the oxygen for her babies. They will grow up in the bromeliad, guarded by their mother. The crab is fiercely protective of her young. But in this instance, she's actually capturing food for them. This crab's way of life is unique, hidden in a pond 30 meters or more in the sky. Even this Lilliputian world has its predators. The Jamaican blackbird evolved a specially long pointed bill to probe for the life of the bromeliad. The blackbird even uses the pond to bathe in. Most of the inhabitants of the Caribbean had arrived by 2 million years ago. It was about that time that a global change, the Ice Age, had a dramatic effect on the Caribbean. The sea level gradually fell, and in place of shallow coral seas, sandbars and then islands appeared. Where the sea had once been, there were mangroves and vast freshwater swamps. This new landscape offered an opportunity to one of the most recent and aggressive immigrants, the Caribbean crocodile, and to one of the few mammals that had made it out to the islands, the hutia. The hutia likes to feed in the small trees that are scattered through the swamps. The crocodile likes to feed on the hutia. Height appears to offer safety, but the hutia is trapped in an isolated tree. Crocodiles gather below the hapless hutia. The Caribbean crocodile has an unusual but The mobile islands of the Caribbean are rafts, still carrying their passengers eastwards. These islands began life in the Pacific. They came through an open door. There was no connection between North and South America. But 15 million years ago, Beyond the watery gap, out in the Pacific, a new set of volcanic islands appeared on the horizon. These islands grew ever bigger and moved eastward just as the Caribbean islands had before them. These new drifting islands were destined to become Central America, the land bridge that would connect the two continents. While they were still out in the Pacific Ocean, the islands were the location for a remarkable spectacle. Each year, turtles, the nomads of the oceans, would visit these isolated islands. They gathered offshore, and in the turbid, wave-tossed waters, the males and females mated. Then the females waited for the cool of the evening. The beaches were empty. There were no land predators on these newborn islands. This was an ideal place for the turtles to lay their eggs. For a million generations, while the moving islands were in the Pacific, hordes of Ridley's turtles came to nest on the beaches. Turtles come ashore only to lay their eggs. Within hours, the females retreat to their oceanic world. The islands the turtles nested on were not stationary. They continued their slow progress eastward. Finally, 2 to 3 million years ago, they closed the gap between North and South America. Central America was born. One of the first creatures to venture down this land bridge was the Coatimundi. It came from the north and found food in abundance on the once isolated turtle beaches. The coati has a wonderful sense of smell, and no turtle nest was safe from these new explorers. The Ridley turtle's world had changed forever. The new predators were there because this land was no longer an island. It was now part of a land bridge dividing two oceans, and these turtles, hatching on a Pacific beach, were separated from their relatives born on the Atlantic side. In time, they evolved into two different species. For the babies of the Pacific Ridley turtle, the immediate concern was to reach that ocean alive. The killing jaws and sharp beaks were many, but the army of baby turtles overwhelmed the predator's hunger. Thousands made the cruel journey down the beach. Some succeeded. In the early days of Central America, the land was covered in deciduous woods and grass, ideal for another traveler from North America, the deer. From the south came monkeys. The trees were their highway. They had evolved in the extensive forests of South America. As the trees colonized the land bridge, so did the monkeys. The fruits and flowers of the trees provided the monkeys and other colonists like the iguana with food. The squirrel traveled from North America. There were no monkeys there, and both creatures feed on the same range of fruit, nuts, and flowers. Would Central America be big enough for both of them? This is not simply a fight over fruit or flowers. Monkeys also have a taste for meat. The most powerful predator of all came from the north, the jaguar. It was to travel down the Central American corridor as South American creatures moved north. For the first time, jaguars and anteaters crossed paths. The anteater was to move as far north as Mexico. The jaguar's dominion would stretch over most of South America. The land bridge was a highway for mammals from both continents. Strange South Americans like the armored armadillo moved up through swamp and grassland. The grassland was home to the armadillo's food, and its sandy soils proved easy digging. This early colonist is a primitive mammal with a curious biology. The female gives birth to quadruplets. The babies are identical clones. The ancient armadillo from the south and one of the advanced mammals of North America met on the grasslands of the land bridge. The skunk is a relative of the weasel, but it's best known for its odoriferous defense. The skunk's handstand lifts its stink gland in the air to help carry the smell. The land colonized by these mammals was dry grassland, but as the Ice Age ended further north, the climate here became hot and rainy. As the weather grew wetter, Central America changed its character. In many areas, the grasslands were replaced by tropical rainforests. The land bridge now offered opportunities to a new range of creatures. Army ants stormed out of the forests of South America, killing and feeding on any insect in their path. Leaf-cutter ants trimmed the trees to feed their colonies. From the north came a curious relative of the horse. Like the ants, the tapir fed on the leaves of this new tropical forest. The linking of two isolated continents and the variety of landscapes has made this realm of the jaguar one of the richest on Earth. The kinkajou is a relative of one of the first pioneers from the north, the Coatimundi. But this creature could not live on the original grasslands. It spends its whole life in trees. It has given up any taste for meat and eggs and lives on a diet of nectar, flowers, and fruits of the forest. The jaguar and kinkajou, northern immigrants, share the nighttime forest with creatures from South America, including the yapok. The yapok trawls the water, waiting for the touch of a fish against its sensitive feet. The yapok is a marsupial. It's so specialized for an aquatic existence that its pouch faces backwards to avoid it filling, and so drowning the baby. Central America became a testing ground where species that evolved separately in North and South America were put in direct competition with each other. As they adapted to this contest, the land developed an atmosphere all of its own. Mantled howlers and tamanduas, arboreal descendants of the giant anteater, feast in the canopy. They share the forest with birds that are entirely Central American, like Montezuma's oropendula. In the forests that cloak the high mountain slopes lives one of the most beautiful birds in the world. The ancestors of the resplendent quetzal came from South America, but quetzals are confined to the cloud forests of Central America. Female quetzals aren't impressed by superficial appearances. However fabulous his feathers, the male still has to show how good he is by digging trial nests. Quetzal females have a determined, practical streak. She will critically check the nest sites of several males. The male's chances of breeding depend on her decision. Dissatisfied with his show house, the female leaves to check out another male. An equally beautiful candidate awaits his chance to show off his handiwork. Scientists and male quetzals do not know exactly what sways the female's final decision. Both do suspect that however critical female quetzals appear, the gorgeous plumage of the male is not wholly irrelevant. The feathers of the quetzal had a powerful impact on the last species to enter this new world. Humans were very late arrivals. They came from the north as recently as 13,000 years ago. Bands of hunters, nomads, they moved down North America and into Mexico and Central America. They were hunters, following the largest mammals that existed then, like the imperial mammoth that fed on the lush vegetation of lake margins. To kill such a huge and powerful beast, the hunters had to get close, and that required careful communication, coordination, and great courage. About 7,000 years ago, changing climate and overhunting led to the mammoth's extinction. But the hunters stayed on. They turned to the other riches of the lake, the birds and the fishes. And then, some 5,000 years ago, human beings began reshaping the land. They invented farming. They began to plant crops, fertilized with the fish from the lakes. This plant would revolutionize America. Maize was domesticated from a native grass. With the advent of agriculture, people began to settle in permanent communities, which began to grow larger and more complex. Fed on maize, great civilizations sprang up in Central America. Their character was to be shaped by the land they grew from and the plants and animals that surrounded them. The most mysterious culture was that of the Taíno, the people of the Caribbean. The Taíno way of life was based on the wealth of the tropical sea. In the mountains and deserts of Mexico evolved another and very different culture. The Aztecs were a warrior race who built a great empire, yet they lived in fear that the sun would not rise unless they spilled human blood. In the tropical forests lived the most elaborate civilization of the Americas, the Maya. It's the story of the Maya and their world that is the next episode of Spirits of the Jaguar. The people of Central America believed that in the beginning, the gods had called a world into existence. But the gods fought among them. Inside the small isles lie the large Caribbean islands of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Cuba, and Jamaica. Further west still lies Central America. Yet 150 million years ago, there was only water. The islands of the Caribbean were forged by undersea volcanoes far to the west, over 1,000 kilometers out in the Pacific Ocean. The myth told of a violent volcanic origin and Earth rising from the dark waters. And indeed, over the millennia, islands emerged from the back. In the Caribbean lived the least known of the cultures, the Taíno. The Maya grew from the tropical forests, and in the harsh northern deserts of Mexico arose the Aztecs. The creation of the region, its wildlife and its civilizations, is the story of Spirits of the Jaguar. This program looks at the creation of Central America, the land that stretches between the great continents of North and South America, and of the Caribbean islands that lie to the east. At the eastern boundary of this new world are the small tropical paradise islands that divide the Caribbean from the Atlantic. The land the gods had created from the ceaseless battle of fire, water, and wind is one of the richest and most diverse on the planet. The spines of the earth monster run the length of Central America, from mountain lakes and high volcanoes, from pine-studded canyons to deserts. In the south, rainforests cloak the steep slopes, and to the east lie the tropical waters of the Caribbean. From this great diversity arose cultures and civilizations shaped by their natural surroundings, among themselves, and destroyed that world. They destroyed and created the world several times over. The forces of nature were their weapons. Then the gods came together to fight the great earth monster. Her broken body arose from the waters to form the mountains of the world.